Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studio, it's time for the GNFCC 400 Insider. Connect, build, and grow with the Greater North Fulton Chamber of Commerce.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wellstar Chamber Luncheon Series for April. My name is Lindsey Petrini, and I am the Chief Operating Officer at Wellstar North Fulton Hospital, and proud to serve as the Chamber's 2021 Chairman, and delighted to welcome you today to this virtual event. At this time, I'd like to start off by recognizing all of the sponsors that make this event possible, starting out with our naming sponsor, which is Wellstar Health System. And representing Wellstar, I just want to remind everybody, as we come into the tail end of the pandemic, to remember to stay healthy and to keep diligence when it comes to washing our hands and wearing our masks and keeping social distance when possible and taking the opportunity to get vaccinated. We are so proud to support our community and proud to be a part of the Chamber and just appreciate the opportunity to sponsor. I would also like to take a moment to recognize our gold sponsor, AT&T. I would like to ask Rich Johnson, the AVP of External Affairs, to say a few words. Rich.
Thank you, Lindsey. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. We're excited about what the North Fulton Chamber really is doing here to bring together the community, to bring together these key issues and talk about how we can continue to move our state and our community forward. As many of you all are aware, the Chamber is really the foremost leader with respect to policy issues and representing business at the state capitol. I'm confident today's speakers and panelists, having worked with both of them for a number of years, are going to bring some really insightful opportunities to talk about some of these key issues. And I hope that you are excited about what we have today. So on behalf of AT&T and our nearly 20,000 employees statewide, we are proud to be a sponsor and proud to support the North Fulton Chamber.
All right.
Thank you, Lindsey.
Thank you so much, Rich. We appreciate AT&T's partnership with the Chamber and the continued support of our events. We'd also like to thank our media sponsor, John Ray and North Fulton Business X, Business RadioX. As a reminder, you may use the Q&A feature at any time to enter any questions that you have as our panelists are speaking. We will get to as many questions at the conclusion of time as possible. It is now my pleasure to introduce our esteemed panel for the 2021 legislative update. Our first panelist is Sam Olens. Sam is in Dentons public policy practice and is a member of the firm's State Attorney General's group. His practice focuses on state attorneys, general and local government affairs matters. Sam has served as Attorney General of Georgia and chair of Atlanta Regional Commission Board. Sam's counterpart for today's event is Tharon Johnson, founder and CEO of Paramount Consulting Group, a firm specializing in media relations, government affairs, and electoral strategy. Tharon has advised elected officials, including President Barack Obama, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, Congressman John Lewis, Congressman John Barrow, and former Atlanta Mayor Kasim Reed. As a regular key contributor on CNN, MSNBC, Fox 5, The Georgia Gang, WSB-TV, and Georgia's Public Broadcasting Political Rewind, Tharon provides insight and analysis of political and policy developments. Our moderator is Edward Lindsey with Dentons. Edward is a partner in Dentons public policy practice and serves as head of the firm's Georgia State Government Affairs team. His focus is on advancing the public policy interests and objectives of clients in the transportation, infrastructure, healthcare, and education sectors. Edward has more than 32 years of legal, political, and leadership experience, including 10 years as a Georgia state representative and 3 terms as the House Majority Whip. He also serves as a chamber board member. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. Edward, I'm going to pass this over to you to lead the discussion.
Well, and Lindsey, thank you. And on behalf of the Georgia Chamber, I thank everyone that has come to join us today. I look forward to the time in which we can all meet again in person, which I hope to be very soon. Tharon and Sam, I appreciate your coming today and giving us your insights as to what took place during the General Assembly. Let's start with what has made the most headlines, which is the bill dealing with election issues. And Tharon, let me sort of start off with you, get your initial thoughts regarding that bill, and then have Sam sort of chime in afterwards.
Well, thank you so much, Ed. It's always a pleasure to be with you and Sam. You guys are dear friends and former colleagues, and want to definitely thank the greater North Fulton Chamber for your leadership. As Rich Johnson mentioned, you guys play a pivotal role in shaping policy and making sure that you represent your membership, not only at the state capitol, but, when the session is not in for the other months of the year. So definitely want to thank you guys so much for bringing me back. And thank you to all the sponsors. I know that the Chamber understands that these events wouldn't happen if it wasn't for your relentless commitment to supporting the Chamber. So thank you so much. Ed, I think many of the folks who are probably watching or listening today have probably heard me talk about Senate Bill 202. It was something that if you had told me at the beginning of the session, Ed, that was going to lead to a Major League Baseball team deciding to pull their all-star game away from the state of Georgia, particularly Cobb County. If you had told me that it was going to lead to a boycott of a Georgia-based company that does so many great things in the community, who's such a great community partner in Home Depot, I wouldn't have believed you. But I think what was the first indication for me was really after the January election, where voters in Georgia decided to send now Senator Raphael Warnock and Senator John Ossoff to the U.S. Senate. And I think that's when we kind of saw, even before that historic election in the months of November and December, the Republicans sort of pushing this false narrative to the people of Georgia about the election results. There was no widespread voter fraud. There was no evidence, substantially submitted that showed that there was all these voter irregularities and all this cheating that was sort of built on this false narrative. And so fast forward, you go to the legislative session, and Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we got up to over 80 bills that were introduced. And I promised my good friend Sam Olens that I would not loop him into the entire Republican Party. He's an independent of most of the things that go on. He'll definitely be able to talk about what he believes. But that was the first indicator that, okay, this is going to be a roller coaster. 80 plus bills. And to be fair, Democrats did introduce some bills as well, which I think a couple of them actually were able to get some language into the final version. And then lastly, as I close, Ed, I would just be very honest with you. I think I've been very vocal that I think the bill definitely restricts voting. It does make it harder in some respects for people to vote. But I have to go back on the premise and the motive of the bill. I can't help but think that Democrats won and Republicans figured out that we finally learned how to play by their rules that they created back in 2005. And quite frankly, we just had a better organization. We had a better team of folks who were on the ground, and we had better candidates. And so I want to move on. I think I don't support boycotts. It's very unfortunate what we're seeing, but I do support the people who are expressing their opposition to Senate Bill 202. What we have to do now is focus on voter education, make sure that with these upcoming elections this year in Georgia, that people understand the new restrictions and the new guidelines that have been put in place. And then ultimately, we got to let the legal process play itself out. I'm not a lawyer. The Attorney General can definitely probably speak to that. But ultimately, there's now a legal process that has to transpire. And then, we'll continue to figure out politically how it affects all Georgians.
Sam, it probably would be helpful to our viewers today to sort of hit on some of the high points about what's in the bill and what's not in the bill, because there's been some confusion as to what is and is not in the bill. So perhaps if I could get you to sort of outline just 3 or 4 of the key points that are in the bill, as well as some things that were of concern early on that turned out not to be in the bill.
Sure, Ed, and it's a pleasure to be here for the Greater North Fulton Chamber, to be here with Tharon and a lot of friends. With regard to Tharon's comment, clearly a lot of this related to the big lie. A lot of this related to the massive fraud that wasn't. And some of the early versions of the 80-plus bills were reprehensible. The effort to limit no excuse absentee voting made no sense. Many folks like me voted absentee every election last year. I used a drop box every election last year. So I think the two things that really heightened the flame were the effort to limit no excuse voting and the effort to remove Sunday voting. Both of those efforts failed and are not in the bill as passed, thankfully. And then you get into an issue of a lot of smaller areas, like when you request absentee ballots, when you have to return the absentee ballots, et cetera. And while that attracts a lot of debris and a lot of attention, Georgia, in all of those spaces, is consistent with the majority of states, but it's always easier to go from no early voting to, well, I'm going to limit, instead of getting X days, it's X -5. So for instance, during this hubbub, Delaware for the first time permitted early voting 9 days. Well, Georgia has a minimum of 17. The Delaware governor, New Jersey, not Delaware, I apologize. The New Jersey governor was all talking about how great they were because they have 9. Well, Georgia has a minimum of 17. So there's a lot of debris through this whole process. Georgia's now only one of 4 states that requires the last 4 digits of your driver's license or other state ID. Most states all require the signature. By definition, my signature in the morning is very different than my signature at 8 p.m. Whether that's reason for a change or not, I don't honestly know. Some folks are very hyper about the fact that only poll workers can give food or water in the line. Some people are very concerned that the Secretary of State no longer chairs the elections board. Frankly, I think that was a mistake. And some were concerned about the ability to suspend county elections offices. At the end of the day, this would be far less controversial if it weren't for the big lie, and far less controversial if there wasn't an initial effort to restrict early voting or Sunday voting. Finally, in the legal area, there were 5 prior lawsuits. Today, there was reference to a 6th being filed. These lawsuits are frankly easier for the state attorney's general office to defend than some of the other litigation they've had to defend in the last couple of years. My educated guess is that the plaintiffs will win on minor issues, but in all likelihood not win on major issues. So I'll give an example. While I personally think it was unfortunate to restrict the number of places where you can drop off your ballot, I don't see that rising to a constitutional level. So I think there are areas of concern, but not areas that a federal court will throw out sections. I do think there are a couple sections in trouble, but once again, those aren't the major sections of the bill. Edward?
All right. We'll come back perhaps if we get some questions about some of the other aspects of the election bill, but I do want to also cover some other things. And Sam, I'm going to start with you on this one. Sort of walk through some of the key things that were passed this session that aren't necessarily making the headlines that you think are most significant. And then, Tharon, I'm going to throw it to you on some of your thoughts.
So I want to mention one win before we get to the legislature, and that's the water wars. The Supreme Court's decision to side with Georgia is huge. For folks in the northern area of the metro area, that's a large decision. We still need to be good stewards of our water. We still can potentially have further litigation from our sister states, but that was probably the biggest win our states had in years. Now, with regard to the legislature, the citizens arrest bill sponsored by Burt Reeves is huge. The bill to severely limit the number of people on probation that Edward led, SB 105, is huge. Those are two really big criminal justice reform wins. And the third issue I'd mention is Senate Bill 6, which was the overall economic development bill. Apparently that has a huge gain for Lockheed, a huge gain for Class 3 railroads, for projects of regional significance, and medical and pharmaceutical manufacturing. So I think we're not going to hear the term Senate Bill 6, but we're going to get some nice jobs growth out of Senate Bill 6. Thank you.
Okay. Tharon?
Yeah, I think, and I thought I heard Sam mention this one, but definitely House Bill 479, which was a long overdue overhaul of the citizens arrest law that we had in Georgia. And that was very significant, as a lot of us were down at the Capitol this year, seeing the Democrats and the Republicans come together in a bipartisan manner to unanimously pass this bill. I also want to highlight that Senate Bill 146, which was a Senate bill that would dealing with personal parental leave, was a big one, because now it extends that parental personal leave to state employees. And we know that at a time where we're just trying to get used to this new norm, that was a really big one that passed. And so just those are just two that come to mind that I think were really good bills in a bipartisan manner that were passed. And ultimately, I agree with Sam on the probation bill. I think that was Senator Tanya Anderson and Senator Strickland as well. That was a bipartisan effort also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there were also some other bills just sort of add to that, dealing with infrastructure in particular, dealing with the freight infrastructure, which is extremely important in terms of goods getting out of the Savannah port and getting into the mainstream of commerce. Georgia actually somewhat lags behind in some of its freight infrastructure, and there was an important bill that was passed to sort of help add to that infrastructure and help us beef up some of our needs in terms of moving freight out of the Savannah port and into the general commerce. Just want to throw that in as well. Tharon, what bills did you feel were big that didn't pass, that issues that are still out there for the 2022 session?
I think the first one that sort of jumped out to me and, be disclosed for our audience, I previously worked on destination resort casino gambling previous years. But it was sort of the inability for us to really pass sports betting. That was something that I thought going into the session this year had a lot of momentum at a time where I want to be able to bet on sporting events legally in Georgia through an app or through my device or a computer. I thought that one was one that had enough support and enough momentum going into the session. There were a lot of people that sort of informed me that I guess casino gambling kind of got mixed in there a little bit. And to be quite frank, just be very frank with you, Ed, I think we want to take our viewers into, our work at the Capitol. I want to applaud the House Democratic Minority Caucus and the Senate Caucus, Democratic Caucus, for really sort of locking down and really standing up for what was right. They wanted to have some negotiations around sports betting that tied into ultimately Senate Bill 202 and really sort of get some compromise language in there, some concessions that they wanted to be done. So I think this fight is not over. This is a 2-year session, but I hope that we'll be able to have that conversation again during the session and we can pass sports betting in Georgia. I think it'll help us rebuild this economy. It could be a definitely alternative method of revenue that will be good for our state. Yeah.
Sam, any additional thoughts in that area about issues that we didn't get past this session?
No, I mean, look, when I first got involved in Georgia politics, there were two Georgias, urban and rural. And some of us remember when each county had one vote and was fortunately declared unconstitutional. Then I started hearing everyone tell me there are 5 Georgias, Atlanta, north, south, west, and east, the coast. We're now back to 2 Georgias, but instead of it being urban and rural, it's Republican and Democrat, as was alluded to by Tharon in his answer. Unfortunately, our legislature has now become like Congress in some ways where the partisan heat is unhealthy. I do not disagree with his statement that as a result of SB 202, some of the bills like sports betting and gambling died this year. But I think that's going to continue this next year. And while I think there are some folks, such as the speaker, that consistently look for opportunities for the parties to be bipartisan, I think especially many of the newbies don't appreciate the need for the bipartisanship. And I think that that's a real problem, because if our state legislature starts looking like Congress, it doesn't bode well for our state.
Let me sort of ask y'all a question and just sort of let folks know beforehand. We do sort of talk about topics that we might want to address, but there was a topic that came up yesterday that I didn't get a chance to talk to my friends Tharon and Sam about, but I think is something very topical, and that was the release of the census data that will lead to redistricting. And Sam, you were the Attorney General in 2011, the last time Georgia went through a decennial redistricting. Can you sort of walk through the process that we now have coming forward and what the folks might expect in terms of redistricting now that the census data is out?
So yesterday we got the macro data that talked about who gets a new congressman, for instance, and who doesn't. We're still waiting for some of the micro data. Clearly, with the increased Democratic votes in the metro area, you would assume that the Republican leadership in the House and Senate will find it more challenging to handle reapportionment. The legislative leadership will hire some outside counsel to assist them. And once they get the micro data, the state apportionment office does a really good job and has all the latest technology. And at that point, they will start looking at maps. And then they will go up to the leadership in both the House and the Senate to show them what the maps look like. And then at that point, candidly, you have historically a little bit of bipartisanship where certain Republicans and Democrats will suggest changes that they view helpful towards their reelection. Because let's face it, legislators are most interested in their reelection. That when it comes down to it, in fact, one of the big problems we have in our society now is the lack of interest in policy and much interest in one's own reelection. So we'll have that. And then at that point, clearly, maps will get a little bit more serious. We'll have a special session towards the end of the year, later than anyone wanted. I say that because it will take that long, not only to get the maps ready for a significant discussion, but also that gives people less time to know what they're running for. I mean, you have folks that don't really know which state house or state Senate district they'll live in, but they know they want to run. So it makes a tight time window to get your campaign up, to start raising money, and to be preparing for qualifying. We were really happy. Last time was the first time when I was Attorney General that the Justice Department found the state maps to be constitutional, both state House, state Senate, and congressional. And I think all the leadership in the state felt very good about it, felt that there had been significant bipartisan displays in that process. One only hopes that will continue this time in a world that's a little bit more hyper-partisan, that makes it more difficult. But for the viewers to understand, it is predominantly a data-driven process, and then the politics follows. Edward?
Aaron, any thoughts on your part?
Yeah, real quick. I mean, this is something that is very personal to me, Ed and Sam. As you guys remember, Governor Kemp appointed me and my colleague Lori Geary to head up the statewide campaign, which was titled "Everyone Counts." And when I saw that yesterday, we were at a 99.9% completion rate in the state of Georgia during a deadly pandemic. That is something we should really celebrate. Just to take our viewers inside. I mean, when Governor Kemp chose Lori and I to lead this effort, I mean, we were off to a great start. I mean, this was a truly bipartisan effort. And I've got to, thank former Governor Deal, for putting the money in the budget that allowed Governor Kemp to create the Complete Count Committee, which is a truly statewide committee that was bipartisan. I mean, we had presidents of colleges and universities. We had the chair of the Democratic Party and the chair of the Republican Party on the Complete Count Committee. You had members from Fair Fight and other different organizations that was on this committee. And so we were off to a fantastic start. And then COVID-19 happened and it really delayed the count. The federal government had to scramble to figure out how do we make sure that everyone is counted in the state of Georgia. And so this is a big win for the state to be able to make sure that everyone is accurately counted. Now, to move into the political portion of this really quickly, Ed, I mean, look, when Democrats were in power, we definitely drew lines and maps that favored our caucus members. And when Republicans, I suspect, would do the same. But I think Sam, just as always, being the brilliant mind that he is, pointed out something. I think with the census data is going to show that we've had an influx of people who have moved into this state, primarily in the metropolitan area, many of whom we believe could be Democratic voters. And so at a time where, you're trying to figure out where you're going to run for office, let's not also forget that you have a lot of current state representatives and state senators who are vacating their seats to run for higher office and constitutional offices. And so I believe that Republicans have really got to make sure that they entertain some type of redistricting reform. Again, I led by saying when we had power, Democrats, we definitely, you remember, Ed, we drew multi-member districts where you had literally one district and it was represented by like 3 different members, right? But I just did not want to get off this call to Zoom interview today and not really take a moment to just celebrate Georgia and celebrate the governor and his leadership and all of the Complete Count committee members and others for their tireless work to make sure that everyone in Georgia was counted.
Yeah, if I could take off my my moderator hat and sort of give my thoughts real quickly, because I did also live through the 2011 process. I was the majority whip at the time. 2 points that I think folks, and I want to first highlight something that Sam said a moment ago, and then compare it to a sister state of North Carolina and how they've handled redistricting over the last few years. Georgia, as Sam pointed out, in 2011 drew its lines, and it was the first decennial maps that were approved underneath the Voting Rights Act by the Department of Justice, and was actually approved in both the state, House, state, Senate, and congressional levels. So Georgia actually came clean in 2011 and then was able to move forward with elections over the next 10 years. By contrast, North Carolina has been in and out of the Supreme Court a few times over the last few years, and its final congressional maps for the last census were not passed until 2019. So to show you what happens if you go too far. Stability, I think, is one thing that folks on the left and the right need to be looking for when it comes to going into the redistricting process, so that folks can know what to expect over the next 10 years. And when you go too far and you end up having the courts involved and maps get tossed out and you have to go back and redraw the lines, that just brings people to have an honest question as to the process as a whole. On a personal level, one of my favorite stories I'll tell you, when I was in leadership, you will have folks coming to you constantly within your caucus and within the other party, complaining about the lines being drawn here or there. And in my case, I represented about 80% before the redistricting in the city of Atlanta, about 20% in Sandy Springs. Well, because of population shifts, I was going to lose Sandy Springs, which meant I was going to lose my backyard because the city limits line ran through my backyard. And so I had several legislators come to me complaining that their mama or their grandmama or their aunt or uncle or their best friend was no longer in their district. And I had to sort of tell them, look, I don't want to hear it. I just lost my dog. My dog is now in another district, so I've got to go home and explain that. So please don't whine about you losing your mother-in-law. Anyway, that was one of my favorite stories from then.
Ed, if you don't mind, and that's a great story, and man, do we miss you at the legislature. I don't know if I like you better as a state representative or as a person that's making, so much money at the world's largest law firm. But the one thing I want to point out too really quickly, Ed, is that we could possibly gain a new congressional seat. Possibly, we got to look at the data. But even if we don't gain this congressional seat, the amount of growth that has happened in the metropolitan area, there's going to be a strong look at, I believe, congressional districts 6 and 7, because of, I believe, nonpartisan reasons, but just the amount of growth in those particular districts. And so it definitely, depending on the data, we could possibly pick up a additional congressional seat.
Yeah. And quite frankly, I think you guys have touched on it, but you're going to have folks, even though there's been an increase in our population of a little over 1 million, if I remember correctly, through the census data, as you mentioned, there's been a shift in where those people are. So while, you'll have a lot changes in metro area, that's the easy part when you're simply dividing out new population centers. The hard part will, quite frankly, be for our friends probably more in middle and South Georgia, in which districts will shift and suddenly folks who have been close allies will suddenly having to be running against each other in 2022. And that's just sort of the nature of the beast. Folks, I've got one question so far in my Q&A box, and I need a few more in the next few minutes. So please start adding your questions in, and I'm going to have these two folks address it. Looking ahead to 2022, you've already discussed gambling. What other issues, Tharon, I'll start with you on this one. What other issues do you expect to see in the 22 session?
I think you're going to definitely see a effort. I will hope to be a bipartisan effort, but I definitely think you'll see Democrats try to look at some provisions, some language of how they can maybe amend Senate Bill 202 or pass new laws based on, as Sam did a great job of explaining to us, that what ultimately will be the verdict in the courts, right? One of the things that I think, for our listeners and viewers, the thing that was so interesting to me is that you heard Sam talk about the drop boxes, right? And so he used them. People in my family, my friends use them, right? But we got to be, we got to call balls and strikes. This was something that was not in state law at the time. This was a special provision that was put in and to give access to voters to let them vote during this deadly pandemic. And so that's something that I think you'll start seeing people kind of revisiting with state law. I think the other thing that's going to happen, Ed, is that you're going to see a big push for full Medicaid expansion. I know that's something that gets Republicans really riled up, and definitely you got to have this very uncomfortable conversation about how expensive it may be or how much is it going to cost the state. But I think at a time when we know that our rural hospitals are closing, we have so many uninsured Georgians, and healthcare costs are still rising, premiums are rising. I definitely think we're going to have an open conversation about Medicaid expansion. Now, I want to be clear, you got to give, you got to point out that Governor Kemp has done some things with the waivers, but many of my Democratic friends believe that that's not enough. And then I'm going to talk about my good friend, Speaker David Ralston, who Ed and Sam, you guys know, we're really friends. We're not really talking as much now as we should be because we fundamentally disagree on the Senate Bill 202. But I think you're going to probably see a huge effort to try to influence him, particularly in the House, to at least have a conversation about fully expanding Medicaid. So those are two things that I think will definitely be front and center for the upcoming session.
Yeah. Sam, anything you want to add to that?
It looks like Sam maybe dropped off. I hope I didn't scare him when I started talking about Medicaid expansion. I mean, I know that's something that it's one of those, sort of issues that can be a little tribal, but it's a wedge issue. But I think he dropped off, Ed.
Well, I think, yeah, unfortunately, we may have some technical difficulties, and hopefully he'll be back in a second. But while I just have you, in terms of the pandemic and the impact on business, what do you see looking ahead that will assist the business community? This is a Chamber of Commerce discussion.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I'll filibuster as long as I can until our friend Sam comes back. Let's just start with personal, right? Like COVID-19 and this deadly pandemic has changed everyone's life, right? And it's had a tremendous mental impact on people. I mean, it's even had a mental impact on me. I mean, I was able to have a son that was born 9 months ago. When I can't wait for him to be able to comprehend what I'm telling him about how he was born during this deadly pandemic. So it's had a lot of stress on families, right? And then there was a tremendous burden that was really put on local governments, and particularly local government leaders up in North Fulton, to really answer questions and put in guidelines and procedures to help people just quite frankly live. I know, listen, we won't get into the sort of strain that it was with trying to get federal funding to the states. And then the state was, then responsible for making sure that everything happened. But I definitely think that it's had a tremendous impact on us personally and families. And let's not forget schools and in-person learning. I mean, our students trying to learn and parents having to figure out this process. But lastly, as you mentioned, Ed, I think it's had a tremendous impact on businesses, particularly small businesses. We definitely had the 2 rounds of the PPP loans. I know that if you look at what's going on in the White House right now and what's going on with the state, there's an effort to try to make sure that we reopen the economy, which Georgia has done. But also keep in mind that we got to mask up. We're not out of the woods yet. We got to make sure that we continue to socially distance and make sure that we get tested. And then now it's this big move to get everyone vaccinated, which, by the way, I mean, Georgia has made a slight improvement, but we're still lagging behind, particularly in our rural areas where people get vaccinated. And so it's had a tremendous effect on businesses. And Ed, lastly, I can't tell you how many business owners I talk to, and I'm a small business owner myself. But one of the conversations that small businesses are having right now and in businesses are how do you retain and recruit talent, good workers, because some workers decided not to come back to work right away because they were able to finally, how long it took to get their unemployment and to figure out different ways to try to make a living. And so I think there's a huge struggle right now for businesses to retain their workers, but also figure out a way to recruit new workers at a time where I think a lot of things have just changed. And we also got to have a conversation about wages too, but that's a conversation for another day.
Let me ask, and Sam, I'm glad to have you back in here. We missed you for a few moments. Perhaps both of you can sort of chat, because both of you deal with this issue, the relationships with the federal assistance when it comes to dealing with the pandemic and how the local and state folks will be dealing with it. We have the American Relief Plan that passed just a few weeks ago up in Congress, which will get a lot of money coming into Georgia. And perhaps if you could start sort of your understanding on how the on how that money will trickle down to both the state and locals.
God, I was all set to respond to the question you gave Tharon when construction decided to knock off my power. I think with regard to your last question, we don't really know the answer to that question. I mean, the governor's talked about having a committee or commission that would assist. It is a huge amount of money. And I think there's going to be a lot of open discussion on how much is for social, how much is for infrastructure. It would certainly be my hope that broadband is on top of that list, since that's so essential to our economic development as well as to our youth. So I would certainly hope that a lot of it would be for broadband, but I just hope cool heads prevail in that regard. And I apologize again, but they're building a building near me, and they decided that was a good time to hit the power line.
Tharon, thoughts on the latest stimulus package from the feds in terms of how the state, the local and the state government will be able to respond in terms of the money that will be coming into it. I believe, for instance, the state is looking to receive a little bit over $4 billion input, and also there'll be a sizable input to the various local governments here in Georgia as well.
Well, I think it's a great thing that, President Biden and Vice President Harris, through their leadership, have been able to basically do what they promised to do. We can't not mention that President Biden will be here on Thursday, right? And so, I think we can talk about Georgia sort of being this new battleground state. I believe we're a blue state. Some people may argue that we're still purple. But if you just look at that money, you just mentioned $4 billion coming to the state at a time when we need infrastructure improvements, right? We still can build better schools. People still need this money. And I think it's really left up to the local governments to figure out how to, spend this money legally and ethically, of course, but making sure that they have the guidance from the federal government and the cooperation from the state. And so, look, I expect for the state and local governments, particularly the state, to respond about some of the things they may not like in this. But I think any time where you're coming out of a deadly pandemic like this deadly pandemic with the coronavirus and COVID-19, having that federal funding coming to the state of Georgia, having that federal assistance, and more importantly, having President Biden as our leader who understands how important this is, I think is definitely the right direction that we're headed in the state. Okay.
I'm getting some questions now, and I'm going to try to sort of boil some of these down. One deals with basically gun legislation, and do either of you see any changes in Georgia gun laws in the 2022 session?
So, there was a bill that looked like it was going to pass that the NRA's promoted for years, and the speaker wisely decided this wasn't the year for it to pass, where you would apply other states' laws to our state. I think time will only tell whether that bill gets a final vote next year or not. I think that's the only kind of bill I can see passing as long as the legislature's predominantly Republican. I frankly would support a red flag law in our state, but I don't think there are the votes to pass a red flag law in our state.
For folks' benefit, Sam, why don't you explain what the red flag law is?
So a red flag law says that if either law enforcement or family, close friends think someone is not stable and they shouldn't have possession of a firearm, it permits them to go to a judge to get a temporary order prohibiting them from having that firearm. It is not permanent. The individual is able to go to court to make a case that they are perfectly able to handle that piece of equipment and to be given that right back. Many states have red flag laws. The criticism is that you're infringing on one's second rights. The other side of that is you're potentially threatening someone's life unnecessarily. I tend to believe that a short-term temporary stoppage prior to a full judicial hearing is worth it.
Tharon, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Sam. I mean, Ed, how many times here lately? But it's been going on for decades. But just look at the mass shootings that we've had just in the last month or so, 2 months, and even we can't not talk about the massacre that happened right here in Atlanta, Georgia. Particularly targeting massage parlors and Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, right? And so no matter how you shape it, there was definitely something there mentally wrong with these individuals. Most times it's definitely has a mental illness component to it that politicians don't want to talk a lot about. But I think we've got to have a conversation in this state, which, by the way, is an open carry state. We can't leave that out, about responsible gun ownership. You can have a conversation about responsible gun ownership, Ed and Sam, without infringing upon someone's Second Amendment right. That's where it gets really tricky, when people feel like you're taking away their Second Amendment. But I think any logical Republican, Democrat, independent, libertarian does not promote an individual, he or she, being able to walk in a gun store and walk out that morning and go and literally kill and murder multiple people without an extensive sort of background check. As Sam mentioned, red flags. I mean, how many lives could have been saved if family members would have been able to do exactly what Sam just described? And so I think the speaker was very, very wise to not go down that route at a time where the state is very divided. And I think he also saw that the country has a lot going on as far. But again, I'm hopeful. I'm so excited about this new administration, Ed, with President Biden and Vice President Harris. I think they're going to do something about this gun violence that we're seeing that's happening in our country. And I think they're going to do it in a way that doesn't violate people's Second Amendment rights. But we've got to have a very uncomfortable conversation about responsible gun ownership in this state. And we got to make sure that we look at red flag laws. And we got to make sure that it's just not so easily accessible to give guns to people who have the intent to kill others. We should be able to purchase guns to defend ourselves, but not to purchase one on the same day and go and basically inflict hate and kill others in this state. I think we've got to make sure that we have a very uncomfortable conversation about that.
Yeah. Well, getting back to sort of a business question that I got from our friend Melvin Everson, who dealt with workforce development. How, in which he sort of related a story, and I've heard it from other business folks as well, where they're just having a difficult time getting workers, skilled workers into particular areas. And what do you guys think that we need to be doing in order to sort of get those necessary skilled workers connected with the employers who are looking for good people right now? Sam, any initial thoughts on your part?
Well, look, under Governor Deal's leadership, there was an effort to either significantly reduce or make certain certification programs free in order to obtain critical needs. That was a great program. It's my hope that we will continue to expand it. We, like most states, place entirely too much emphasis on a 4-year college degree and spend insufficient emphasis on technical college programs. Anytime I need someone to help me at my house, their bills are solid. They're doing fine, as they should, but there are shortages of all those trades. So I think whether it's IT, whether it is cybersecurity, whether it relates to our film industry, frankly, it is a good place for government to help fund those programs that provide those necessary jobs.
Yeah, I think real quick, because I know we're running short on time. I think, I mentioned that earlier. I think we got to really look at an opportunity to be innovative, right? One thing that this deadly pandemic has shown us, Ed, and I hope I don't hurt any small businesses or businesses that rely on this, but, we realize that being in the office has something that, I remember walking over to you guys at Dentons or then McKenna and just kind of having a conversation, but we've all had to learn how to do this, and that is have virtual conversations. And so I think workers have got to figure out, how do you create an environment, a virtual environment for your workers, if need be, if you choose not to reopen your offices. I think that's something we got to do. And then also we got to have a very uncomfortable conversation about wages. I was kind of going there earlier. While we celebrate Georgia's the number one state to do business, we still have a lot of wage stagnation that's happening in this state. There's a lot of income inequality that's happening in this state, particularly in the Atlanta metro area. And so I think you got to really look at whether or not we should raise the minimum wage, which hasn't been done in decades. And so that's probably another way that we can try to make sure businesses are able to retain and recruit good workers.
Yeah. One last question, and I'm going to give both of you because we're sort of running short on time, but both, and this is probably the responsibility of both political parties, obviously sharp differences on policy in some areas. Georgia's getting a black eye around the country. A lot of folks feel something. What can and what should both leaders in both political parties be trying to do to calm the waters and to encourage folks around the country that Georgia is a good place to live, work, and play? Sam, I'll start with you.
Well, thanks for letting me start on the easy question there, Edward.
Yeah.
I think you need leadership from both parties to come together and frankly, be part of that public discussion. That yes, we have differences. Yes, folks in every state have differences, but we're all together on the need to grow jobs in our state, to make sure people are healthy in our state, to make sure people have a proper education. And I think it literally takes both sides of the aisle to agree to be part of that public discussion, show up together on CNBC, show up together on other media and say, yes, we have our differences, but we all work to enhance our state. These jabs on Fox or MSNBC aren't helpful. Folks need to come together now and work for the greater good.
Tharon?
And I think, a perfect example is what we're doing right here today. I mean, look at what the greater North Fulton Chamber is doing. I mean, bringing us together. Why politically we represent different sort of parties and we have a different philosophy and a fundamental argument about those policy issues, but we're able to do it in a civil way. And so I think we got to have more of these conversations. And then I think the last thing we got to do, Ed, we got to go back to the obvious. One of the things that really discourages me is that we cannot allow Senate Bill 202, and which I believe restricts the most fundamental right we have as Americans. That is our opportunity to vote. It is it should be the most robust way that you can express your opinion and what you want to support. And that's being taken away from us, right? But we got to separate that conversation from the partisan conversation that is going on. And we just got to take it there between a governor and a potential gubernatorial candidate and corporations. And what's really unfair to corporations is that they should not be bullied. They should not be sort of feeling like they're going to be retaliated against because they're speaking up for their workers. And so I think if you can separate those three things, let's have a conversation about voting and voting rights. Let's separate the political back and forth between gubernatorial candidates and an incumbent governor who's running for governor and attacking a president and attacking a potential gubernatorial candidate. And then let's also have a conversation about, how do we really figure out that we continue to rebuild the reputation of this state and don't attack corporations who, by the way, employ so many people in this state, in the workers. And so I think, we got to break them into those three buckets.
Yeah. Let me, in my last couple of minutes, and I'll start off, once again, maybe taking my moderator hat off and simply encourage folks to come down and communicate with their representatives and senators. Georgia is actually a fairly, for want of a better term, user-friendly state when it comes to connecting with your senators and representatives and making a difference. I can tell you as a former legislator, having someone from my community get a hold of me and sort of talk to me about an issue face-to-face was the most powerful. By phone, the second. A personal letter or email is even better. If you want to simply send a junk email, don't bother because no one's going to read those. But the ones that they will read or listen to, or where you take a few minutes and have a personal connection with your legislator. I had one bill in particular where a woman came down with her child and was very concerned about a medical issue that, quite frankly, initially I thought was a bad idea. but after 20 minutes talking to her and having her tell her personal story, I ended up co-sponsoring the bill under one condition, that she go back and tell all of her neighbors that coming to the Capitol works. So I do encourage everyone on this call to please do that. Sam, Tharon, I'm going to give you a moment for your closing, and then I'll give Sam the last word.
Well, what a difference an election make. Ed, you're able to let the Democrat go first for a change. I appreciate it. But no, I just want to thank Stacy for her leadership in the Greater North Fulton Chamber, and thank all the sponsors for inviting us back. This conversation is so important, and I just, as Ed mentioned, want to just encourage everyone to be engaged, have civil conversations, not be afraid to talk to the opposite race or the opposite sex. Don't be afraid to talk to someone who politically is not aligned with your party. I've found that while I have to bite my tongue a lot of times and really take a lot of deep breaths, I learn so much more by talking to people who don't look like me, who don't live where I live, and that's not necessarily agree with all of the policies that I think that they should agree with. And so I just encourage everyone to continue to remain civil. And then lastly, make sure you continue to mask up, be careful, get vaccinated. Even if you are vaccinated, just continue to make sure that you are careful, because we're just not out of the woods yet. But thank you all so much for allowing me to just share a little bit of wisdom with you all today.
Sam?
So once again, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be with the chamber, to be with Tharon and Edward. For years, several of us in the Republican Party, to include Edward, have sought to strongly make the point that the Republican Party needed to diversify, that the Republican Party needed to seek friends, not only throughout the state, but when it came to racial, economic, ethnic folks that make up our great state. And for many years, that discussion was not really heard. And when you look at the growth of our state in the last decade, if the Republican Party does not choose to widen its tent and to openly encourage minorities, people of color, to be a part of the Republican Party, the election last year will not only not be a fluke, but it will be the norm for years to come. So this is a critical time that the Republican Party either learns its lesson to broaden the tent, or it will be the minority party in our state for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you to you both. And I apologize for I couldn't quite get to all the questions, but we got to many of them. And for those that didn't get their question answered, once again, contact your local legislator and continue the discussion. With that, Callie, I turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Edward. I appreciate it. Thank all of you gentlemen. Tharon, Sam, you guys were amazing, as you always are. As we conclude today's event, I want to express how grateful we are, of course, to all three of you for your time in joining us. As Tharon mentioned earlier, the Chamber cannot offer great programs like this without our sponsors. We would like to thank Wellstar North Fulton Hospital and AT&T for their tremendous support. Thank you as well to John Ray and North Fulton Business RadioX as our media sponsor. We actually have so many upcoming events planned and hope you're able to join us. Just a few of those. On June 11th, we will be hosting our summer soiree, which is an answer to our gala, which is usually held in January, February. This will be presented by Northside Hospital on Friday, June 11th at the Ameris Bank Amphitheater. It will feature a taste of North Fulton in a fun, chic outdoor setting, and tickets and sponsorships are now available on our website. I hope that you'll make plans to join us for our May Georgia Office Interiors Business After Hours. John Ray, who is our media sponsor, will be celebrating his 5th anniversary as our host there at Ray's Killer Creek on Thursday, May 13th. I also want to remind you that the deadline is this Friday. If you are interested in Leadership North Fulton, or if you think somebody in your office might be great to participate, reach out and connect with us, and we will make sure and get that information out to them. Finally, I am very excited to announce that today was our last virtual Wellstar Chamber Luncheon. I hope you will all join us safely on May 25th for our first in-person luncheon at the new Hilton Alpharetta Atlanta Hotel, which is on Windward Parkway. The focus of that luncheon will be on education and workforce with a very distinguished panel, including representatives from the University of North Georgia, Mercer University, Gwinnett Technical College, and Fulton County Schools. Thank you to our sponsors, Goodwin Mills and Kaywood, and Parrish Construction Group. To register and check out all of the Chamber's events, you can always go to gnfcc.com. I hope you all have an enjoyable afternoon, and we stand adjourned.